Hey up everyone. Well, I've had various conversations in the comments and have seen a few rant videos recently about how expensive motorcycles are these days, and in some ways I agree with them. But it made me think, and so I decided to look at the reality of motorcycle prices rather than just going by gut instinct and ranting along with the rest. The results were a surprise to say the least. First, I have to state the obvious. There are some motorcycles out there that I do consider massively overpriced. I will come to that, but I want to look at a cross-section of bikes and maybe more importantly at the industry as a whole. We do have a mad licensing system in the UK these days which isn't helping to attract young riders, but I said a few years back in the video linked in the description at the end that I thought the industry could do more to attract young riders and that there was a dearth of small affordable bikes. Things have begun to change since then, and I welcome that, but I thought it would be interesting to look at the issues around the affordability of motorcycles. Every man and his dog seems to shout about motorcycles being expensive, but are they really? Or is it other factors that make them seem more expensive? I've mentioned the UK licensing system, and to be clear, it is expensive and not helpful in attracting new riders. The latest limitations on CVT repetition is an interesting one too, because on one level I completely agree with it, but on another it means people who genuinely can't afford to pay for an A2 test can only ride for 2 years. If someone fails their car test consistently, they don't have their provisional license taken away after 2 years. So why does it happen with bikes? Is it yet another thing that threatens the entry of new riders into the world of motorcycles? But for now, let's concentrate on the bikes, because as has been talked about many times, motorcycles were once seen as cheap, affordable transport for many, and for the majority of us, that developed into a lifelong passion. Have the days of cheap, affordable motorcycles gone, or is it still possible to see motorcycles in that way? Is it simply a shift in perspective that's needed? I will look at the bikes from different eras to compare the changing tide of motorcycle pricing, but let us remember that the 70s and 80s were the years that the Japanese turned the worldwide market upside down, so I will be looking at the prices of Japanese and European brands. I will include some US pricing as well as the UK, but I have to rely on research for that, so if I get something wrong, correct me in the comments. Don't crucify me, I'm only human. Try to remember though, if you enjoy it, please try and remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Sharing the video anywhere you think people will be interested helps us a lot too. There's more about the channels here on the YouTube and on Rumble and in the Ko-fi group later on, so I'll leave that for now. Let us start with a fairly average example today. The Kawasaki Z650 is a solid, reliable bike today in exactly the same way as it was when it first rolled into our showrooms back in 1976. Now, in the UK, the prices start at around £7,800. And in the States it looks like around $9,000. Accounting for inflation, that £7,800 would have been the equivalent of around £850 in 1976, and in the States the $9,000 figure would have been around $1,600. That difference is caused in part by the different inflation figures, but let's look back, and in 1976, when the first Z650 was released, it had a retail price of £1,075 in the UK, and in the USA it had a retail price of $2,000. And yes, I know the old air-cooled Z650 was a 4-pot and the new water-cooled one is a twin-pot, but the reality is that stock they produce around the same power, and for once the newer version is lighter. So again, accounting for inflation, the price of the old Z650 would be around £9,800 in the UK today and about $11,300 in the USA. That wasn't exactly what I thought would be the result of this little experiment in maths, to be honest. So I thought I have to try a few more bikes to see if that was just an anomaly. But a question: would you pay almost £10,000 or $11,300 for a 67 horsepower 210 kilo air-cooled 4-pot 650 today? Even one designed by the genius that was Ken Inamura? If you could get a lighter, cheaper twin pot that produced the same power for £2,000 or $2,300 cheaper, would that one be your choice? My next thought was to compare the various 400 singles today with the fantastic Suzuki DR350, and I have, but I did come up against the woeful search engine results we are left with today, and it wasn't easy. There was a time not so long ago that finding the MSRP of a bike from the 90s wouldn't have been so hard, but now it just assumes I actually wanted the answer to a different question, and no matter how hard I tried, I could not find retail prices for the first few years of the DR350's production. Eventually, I found an RRP in the UK of £2,299 in 1992, and in the USA an MSRP of $3,599 in 1993. Today, that would mean £6,080 in the UK and $8,000 in the USA. Today we have the Honda CRF 300 at £6,000 in the UK and around $6,000 in the US. The Royal Enfield 450 Himalayan, again at £6,000 in the UK and $6,000 in the US, and the Triumph Speed 400 at £4,995 in the UK and $4,995 in the US. So one thing that's consistent is that smaller capacity bikes are cheaper in the US than they are in the UK. Why is that? Make of it what you will, it means that, believe it or not, all the small capacity singles I've mentioned are significantly cheaper now in real terms than the very budget-friendly Suzuki DR350 of the 90s. You can see by now this wasn't maybe going the way I had expected, and both of the bikes I had started with were Japanese bikes, built during the years we called them Jap crap. So I had to try again, and this time I thought, okay, let's think of two European bikes to compare, and I went for the Moto Guzzi V7 and the BMW R90. In 1975, the BMW R90 came in two variants, and as far as I can find out, retailed for around £1,800 in the UK and just over $3,500 in the States. But that did take some finding, and I can't guarantee it's 100% right. I guess if it is, then that's a good example of how sometimes we get things cheaper than the USA. What it would mean is that today in the UK, the BMW R90 would be £19,000, and in the USA, around $21,000. In 1973, the Moto Guzzi V7 retailed at around £1,200 in the UK and around $2,500 in the States. But again, that took some finding, and I can't guarantee it's right. What it would mean is that the old Moto Guzzi V7 today would cost around £18,500 in the UK and $18,000 in the USA. Today, the latest Moto Guzzi V7 retails at £9,000 in the UK and around $11,000 in the USA. And the BMW R1290 goes for $14,500 in the UK and $16,500 in the USA. So all my ideas of bikes being more expensive today than they used to be have been blown well and truly out of the window, across the street and down past the next town. How wrong we can be, eh? Yes, bikes like the Ducati Panigale V4 RRR SSP 12 Gold Special Edition Carbon is expensive at around $90,000 to $100,000. It will make a big hole in any bank account, but it is just a rich boy's toy, and not really very representative of anything. Back in 75, that would have been £8,400 in the UK, or $16,800 in the USA. So if we think about the £1,000 price tag of the Z650 when it was released, the Ducati would be over 8 times the price of the Z650 both here and in the States. Today, you could get at least 10 of many bikes and very many more of others for that price. Most of the higher end bikes back then were sub £2,000 here and certainly below $3,000 in the States, unless we're talking MV Agusta or one of the other really exotic brands. That would price them at around £21,500 here and around $18,000 in the US today. So a pretty solid equivalent of today's pricing, I'd say. Today I can buy a solid, reliable 650 single adventure bike from Vosges for £5,000 brand new, with all the luggage, and the brand new Model 600 twin-cylinder version comes in below £6,000. In 1976, that would be £460 to £560. So around half the price of a Z650, and about a quarter of the price of the BMW R90. So what is it that makes it seem to us that buying bikes is so much more costly than it used to be? Because I do think that is the most commonly held opinion among many of the bikers I've spoken to in recent years. Well, one thing I noticed was that during the calculations covering the early 70s, I kept getting some very extreme conversions. And then I realised that in the UK there was a lot of political turmoil at the time with what was described as runaway inflation. So that did probably affect some of the UK pricing results, and it got me thinking. Then, when I was doing one of the calculations, the inflation calculator I was using proudly announced that since 1975 the UK pound has lost 90% of its value. Now, my initial thoughts were, surely that can't be right, but it made me dig, and I ended up down a very deep, dark rabbit hole. Just as when calculating averages, inflation can be calculated in different ways to achieve different results, depending what the agenda of the people doing the calculations are. What it showed me is that both here and in the States, and I assume most other countries, it's not just the level of inflation that has affected pricing, but the loss in value of all the currencies we've been using over the past 50 years plus. Yes, the two things are related, but the cumulative effect is the killer here. When I actually tried to find some definitive figures about how much the dollar, pound and others have lost in real value terms over the years, it was surprisingly difficult, to be honest. But I guess there are some numbers that the powers that be just don't want talked about. Beyond that, obviously over the years we have had the use of an expansion of the credit system, and financing deals for everything, including motorcycles, have got ridiculous. I was brought up with the idea that if you wanted something badly enough, you saved, often making sacrifices until you could afford to buy it. Now, pretty much any man, woman or adolescent child can get a finance deal on any motorcycle they want. Dealers have become little more than finance brokers much of the time, and maintenance and servicing beyond basic plug-and-play tasks are beyond the skill levels of most of the techs they employ, who I won't call mechanics because most of them aren't. They plug a laptop in, the laptop says this part wrong, they swap it and hope the fault goes away, and repeat ad infinitum without really knowing much about what they're doing at all. And yes, there are exceptions, but they are getting rarer by the day. And that brings us to what I will call a sense of entitlement. You see, back in the day, very few of the people I knew bought new bikes. We couldn't afford them in general. We were glad to pick up second-hand cheap wrecks to do up because that was the only way most of us got on the road. We started on small bikes and gradually worked our way up. Now, people have been convinced that the only way of owning a bike is to go and sign on the dotted line of some PCP agreement that means that they'll never actually even own the bike. And they're sold bikes that are far too big for a beginner. This can often put people off long term because the learning curve is so much steeper. So the customer gets a bike they have paid a lot of money for, and it's restricted until they have passed their test. And by then, the PCP agreement is up, and they either want another different bike anyway because they are already on the roundabout of credit. That means they never have the chance to develop that same emotional attachment we did. But that's a different story. It means they're always looking at bigger, more expensive bikes than they actually need. And the marketing teams of the various companies feed that urge constantly. Back to the question of how expensive motorcycles really are though. The elephant in the room is something that is again much less talked about than many economic issues, and that is the value of our wages. The reality is that in the past wages were always linked to productivity, but with the advent of automated manufacturing and computer control systems, the per person productivity has skyrocketed. But that wasn't and still isn't reflected in most people's wage packets today. Inflation has consistently risen throughout the world, even when it's not rising so quickly. The prices never go down, do they? Just the quality. So, there is no respite from the deficit created by that increase. Add to that the fact that those figures are constantly manipulated to try and create a feel-good factor, and you begin to see how much the cumulative effect really is. 1 year with a 5% inflation rate is one thing, but 10 years with compound inflation means that any money we have is worth less and less every second it is in our possession. Then we have the fact that even in the good years, over the past 50 years plus, wages have never risen in line with inflation. So, prices of everything always rise faster than our wages rise, and the currency they pay us in is worth less too. Production has been streamlined, costs cut to keep prices just in reach, but instead of complaining about how expensive bikes are these days, maybe we should be asking the question, why do motorcycles feel more expensive today instead? They feel more expensive, but not because they are, but because we are getting paid less and less in real terms every year, while all the time being convinced we are better off and that we need bigger and better, ever more expensive bikes in order to really have fun. I call that bullcrap. So maybe next time you go to say motorcycles are so expensive these days, maybe we should all really be saying, why are our wages worth so much less than they used to be instead? I will leave you with that thought for today. Cheers for watching. I can't wait to hear your comments below on this one. Thanks as always to everyone for all the support. Do try and remember to like the video and subscribe if you haven't already, and share the video anywhere you think people will be interested too if you could. If you'd like to help us stay truly independent, you can make a one-off donation or join our group of monthly subscribers on the Ko-fi link in the description. There you get access to a private group where I share videos I can't screen on YouTube. Join us on Rumble too. The channel is new, but it already has some great content. Don't forget, we also make the best biker t-shirts. Hundreds of original designs on premium quality t-shirts and neck gaiters, all available worldwide. Links to the main website and the Redbubble shop are in the description. Have a great week, and always remember, keep your spanners close and your keys even closer. Ride free, everyone!